Hello everyone, and welcome to the first of the supplemental videos for the Silent Hill 3 Let's Play. I'm DarkChiron, and this video, at the very first, is going to be kind of explaining what these are going to be about. And then we'll, of course, as the video title has suggested, discuss more in depth the plot of the first Silent Hill. Silent Hill 3 has kind of a brief synopsis of kind of what happened in Silent Hill 3. However, we're just going to kind of discuss things a little bit more in depth and go over some of the things that happened and how they affected the games later on. The game starts off with the opening cutscene, which, unless you know what's happening already, it's kind of a jumbled mishmash of images playing across the screen. However, the gist of it is that Harry Mason and his wife, who, as far as I could find, has no name, she's just Mrs. Mason, they find a child just sitting on the side of the road while they're vacationing at Silent Hill, and they say, "Oh, look, a baby! We've always wanted one of these." And they apparently applied the Finders Keepers rules to a child. Apparently that works, and they just kept her and took her home. Unfortunately for them, Harry's wife was terminally ill and ended up dying a few years later. So he's left to raise their daughter Cheryl all by himself. Well, he gets into his head, and I believe also she kind of started getting influencing towards wanting to go to Silent Hill again. I guess he assumed that him and his wife vacationed there and had a good time, so he might as well take his daughter there. And she's going there for other reasons. So they're on their way. They meet a nice police officer who apparently wrecks ahead of them. And then Harry, trying to check out the police officer's wreck, gets into a wreck himself, trying not to hit a little girl who runs into the road, and he passes out. After the crash, Harry wakes to find that Cheryl has disappeared. Apparently, she survived the crash uninjured and decided to walk off on her own. So, being the good fighter that he is, he decides to try and track her down, and he ends up finding her in the town, but she doesn't respond to him at all and just continuously runs away from him. So, he ends up chasing her into an alleyway, which at first seems normal, but then everything suddenly goes pitch black, and the entire alleyway changes into a warped and twisted version of itself with various hospital implements laying around. Eventually, he also finds a nice blood trail, and a couple of corpses, and a couple of monsters. Now, I have to make a special note here. These monsters only appear in the North American version of this game, which came out first before any other version of the game. They appear both here and later on in the schools. Now, these monsters were found in Japan and in Europe to be too close in appearance to human children. And the censorship boards not want you to be killing human children. So in the Japanese and European versions of the game, this monster is replaced with a monster that appears far later in the game. And because of this, several supplemental works, several documents that were written about the monsters of this game completely ignore that these creatures exist at all, and call the monster that replaced them by the name that was supposed to be used for these creatures, which is Mumbler. So these creatures end up getting called the Grey Children because that's a creature in the Silent Hill movie, and for some reason someone decided that the creatures in the movie were the same as these and decided to start calling them the same thing. That's as far as I can tell, because I can't find any actual from Team Silent documents to say these gray guys are called Grey Children. So, as far as I know, these gray guys are the real Mumblers, and the thing that everyone calls Mumblers that has claw fingers are called, oddly enough, claw fingers. So, but I can't find any official documents to call the creatures with claw fingers either. So the whole thing is very confusing, and I don't know. That's just a little interesting side note. I can't provide you the really real answers. I can only give you opinions. My opinion and the opinion of some other people are the gray creatures are Mumblers, the claw finger guys are claw fingers, and everyone just got the name wrong because the Japanese team had to call the creatures what they were in Japan, and the Mumblers were replaced with claw fingers in Japan. So, there. I hope that was confusing for all of you. But in any case, Harry, being your standard suburbanite father, falls victim to these creatures and they end up killing him. But he doesn't really die. He wakes up in the diner completely unharmed, so I guess that was just a dream sequence for him. It didn't really happen, I suppose. But anyway, in the diner, looking over him, is good officer Sybil. She was the officer that passed him, who apparently wrecked her bike on the outskirts of town, but is also unharmed from the crash somehow. Everyone's suffering major injuries and coming up unharmed.
Glad to hear it.
Harry and Sybil start discussing what's going on, and Harry asks, for the first of many times in this game, the question for which he is so greatly famous.
Have you seen a little girl?
Of course she hasn't. However, she has also seen the monsters that he has seen. And she tells him that since he's a guy who doesn't really know how to protect himself, he should have her gun. She'll be fine. She's going to go and get more police officers for help, because her radio and any radio she's found thus far has been unable to contact anyone. So her plan is to leave the town to get more help and to leave Harry by himself with a gun that he's untrained for in a town full of monsters, which is a good plan. And it shows how much of a good plan it is, since as soon as she leaves, he's attacked by a winged monster that breaks through the diner window. Once again, being the incredibly good father that he is, Harry decides that he has to go back out and find Cheryl, because if this town is completely infested with monsters, she's obviously not going to be safe in it. So he ends up going back to the alleyway that he last saw her, where he was just viciously attacked by a group of small children monsters, and ends up finding that the alleyway is now collapsed in on itself. However, he does find Cheryl's sketchbook that she was using to draw in on the road trip down to Silent Hill. And the notebook tells him that he needs to go back to the school. Once there, he fights more of the small maybe mumblers, solves a great deal of puzzles that all have a kind of childhood fairy tale theme to them, and also ends up unlocking the school's clock tower. He enters the clock tower, the sirens once again start squealing, and he leaves the clock tower to now find himself in the otherworld version of the school. Now, having just brought up the otherworld for the first time, I'm going to mention something. There's a great deal of debate amongst various fans about the exact nature of the otherworld, what it does, how it works, its exact relationship to the real world. And we'll be discussing that later, but I'm not going to get real in-depth about that here. However, I do have opinions about it. I'm going to talk about it a bit later on, whenever we get to a certain point in Silent Hill 3. And the real important change to the environment that Harry ends up finding in the Otherworld School is that there's a massive seal, supposedly drawn in blood, on the floor of the courtyard of the school. This seal plays a big role in what's going on in Silent Hill, and we'll learn more as the plot develops. The Otherworld School has a couple of disturbing things to present to Harry, such as a jump scare of a body falling out of a locker, a bunch of corpses hanging up from various walls, and namely a body being hung up in a bathroom stall with the words, "Leonard Rhine, the monster lurks," written next to it. The monster lurks is a reference to a book that you find in the library later on. Now this book is covering poltergeists, namely the ability for the negative thoughts and emotions of a person to be able to project their fears and nightmares onto the real world. And the book makes a special note of saying that girls are most susceptible to having this phenomenon happen around them. This is very important for later in the story. And to top off all the disturbing imagery, Harry ends up getting a phone call from Cheryl on one of the phones he randomly finds, where she's begging and pleading for him to come and help her.
Daddy, help me. Daddy, where are you?
Cheryl!
This only gives Harry more determination as he descends further into the school and ends up fighting a giant lizard named the Splithead, which is a creative name because its name splits in half and tries to consume you whole. Just like some of the puzzles that Harry solved, this monster is straight out of a fairy tale book that you can read inside the Otherworld School as well. Emerging victorious, Harry travels into the next room and finds a woman who strangely disappears in front of him as the world shifts from the other world back into the real world. Accompanying this disappearance is the sound of church bells being played in the distance, so having nowhere else to go, Harry decides to find out who's ringing the bells. Maybe it's Cheryl. Unfortunately, it's not. It's just a crazy woman named Dahlia Gillespie. As soon as Harry shows up, she starts ranting about how she foretold his coming with the help of gyromancy, whatever the hell gyromancy is, and ends up telling him that only he can stop the spreading darkness that he's been experiencing, and to do so, he must use the Floros and travel to the hospital. Upon telling him this, she immediately leaves with no further details, and with no chance for Harry to ask any questions about this mission. So, having, once again, nothing better to do, Harry decides to take the Floros, as she suggested, and go to the hospital. Upon arriving in the hospital, he finds Dr. Michael Kaufman, who has apparently been fighting off his own monsters recently. He seems to have no idea what's going on any better than Harry does, but he does allow Harry to once again ask the famous question.
Have you seen a little girl anywhere?
Well,
They decide to split up because why would you want to stick together and have safety in numbers when you're traveling through a city completely overrun with monsters?
Good luck out there.
Regardless, in another room in the hospital, Harry finds a bunch of smashed vials on the ground and a bunch of red liquid on the floor. Being the normal and reasonable guy that he is, he decides to scoop up a bunch of that liquid in a plastic bottle because, I mean, hey, wouldn't any of us? One trip on the hospital elevator later finds Harry once again in the other world, and shows us another cutscene of the woman who disappeared from the school. We find out that her name is Alessa because of a photo in a recently used hospital room. Shortly after, Harry also finds another person named Lisa Garland. She's a nurse at the hospital and apparently, besides Dr. Kaufman, the only person left inside the hospital. As it turns out, she doesn't know anything either. Apparently both she and Dr. Kaufman were both unconscious when all the trouble in the town started, so they can't provide any help at all. And with that in mind, Harry decides to completely ditch this useless conversation by passing out as sirens are once again playing.
Harry? Harry, let me help you.
Unfortunately for him, this plan backfires because when he wakes up, Lisa is gone and he's met only with Dahlia Gillespie again. At the very least, this time she gives him a little bit more of a detail about what his quest entails, in that he's supposed to be going around the town trying to stop the spread of something called the Mark of Samael, which is the big symbol that he found in the otherworld courtyard of the school. She ends up giving him the key to an antique store in order to try and find the other church. Upon entering the antique store, we just run in once again to Sybil Shepherd. It seems that she was unable to go and find help since every single road leading out of the town has collapsed into a giant pit. She does mention, however, that did not apparently stop Cheryl from walking on air across the road towards the lake into the town. She also mentions that apparently the town had a huge problem with drugs, namely a drug called White Claudia, which was being sold to tourists and was apparently a quite booming business. After all this, Harry decides to proceed further into the antique store without Sybil. He ends up finding an altar which obviously marks down the location of the other church. Once finding it, it catches on fire and he ends up passing out again. After he's been gone for a while with no word, Sybil ends up going into the hole trying to find him, and it finds out that he has actually vanished. Now, I know I said I wouldn't discuss the other world very much in this video, but there is one distinction I need to make here so that people kind of notice something about this sequence. This transition is not the same as a transition from the real world to the other world. In the flashback, Harry ends up going and talking to Lisa once again. The whole thing has a really dreamlike feel to it. It has a very strange camera filter on it, and both of their voices are incredibly echoey.
Before this place was turned into a resort, the townspeople here were on the quiet side.
With that said, the conversation is rather enlightening, where Lisa ends up discussing that apparently the town was really deeply involved in some kind of strange religions, and that spellcasting and magic was actually a real thing that people were doing within the town. And the apparent side effect of all this was a rampant series of mysterious murders, to the point where the town was said to be cursed and people kind of started to abandon the place.
Lisa.
And to top it all off, when asked about Dahlia, she says that she actually does remember her, and that she apparently lost a daughter in a fire several years back and went completely insane because of it. Having gleaned all valuable information from Lisa, Harry decides to leave her presence by passing out once again, this time waking up in the otherworld version of the antique store, with Sybil nowhere in sight. However, he does wake up on yet another one of the seals. This time our trip to the otherworld has us taunted by a series of TVs who show off the mark of Samael before displaying a video of Cheryl pleading for Harry to help. The audio for this is once again the exact same audio that he heard when he got called on the phone by Cheryl earlier. And once again, worried about Lisa from that dream sequence that Harry just had, he decides to visit her in the hospital once again. To discuss the fact that all of the roads out of town are all collapsed, and Lisa points out that if he wants to get to the lake, there is another way. There is apparently a waterworks of the city which goes from the town all the way to the lake if he wants to go. He tries to get her to go with him because, it's obviously very dangerous in this place and she's not safe where she's at, but for some reason she says that she can't leave the hospital. Because of this, Harry just leaves her there and ends up traveling through the waterworks, which is this game's sewer level. And like all sewer levels, this part of the game sucks. But it's also mercifully short, and on the other side, Harry ends up finding Dr. Kaufman being attacked in a pool hall. He saves Dr. Kaufman and tries to get him to disclose a little bit more information about what's going on. He asks him if he knows who Alessa is, and he immediately says no and walks off in a very quick manner like he's trying to hide something.
Do you know a girl called Alessa?
No.
Kind of hinting at what he does have to hide, we in a nearby store find a safe full of drugs and a journal detailing how the person who runs the store is being forced to sell the drugs by a man and a woman, and how anyone who has ever tried to stop their drug selling have ended up being murdered. To kind of drive that point home as well, Harry ends up finding a red vial within the gas tank of a motorcycle nearby, and the red liquid seems to be the exact same red liquid that he found smashed on the floor of the hospital that he now has in a plastic bottle. Upon finding this vial, Kaufman breaks into the room, yells at him for a while, takes the vial, and threatens to kill him.
That's none of your business.
This all kinds of points towards the idea that Kaufman is the man who was forcing people to sell drugs for him, namely the White Claudia. And it also kind of hints that he is responsible for the deaths of all of the people who tried to stop the drug trade within the town. Traveling a little further, Harry once again shifts into the other world, but this time he states that it felt like it's a different kind of shift, like it's a deeper and more complete shift. Like the world isn't just kind of shifting over to the other world, but like the other world is actually replacing the real world completely. Harry later finds Sybil on a boat where he discusses this idea a little bit further about the idea that the other world seems like it's just someone's nightmare reality being overlaid on top of the real world and kind of overtaking it and rewriting how the real world behaves. Dahlia interrupts and provides a little bit of clarity onto why it feels like this otherworld shift was more deep and more permanent, and the fact that apparently 2 more marks of Samael will lead to a complete spread of the darkness throughout the entire town and an irreversible change from the real world to the other world. She also claims that once this change takes place, everyone within the town will be trapped in hell. Fortunately enough, she does know where the next 2 marks are going to be appearing, both at the lighthouse and at the amusement park. She tells them that the person spreading these marks is Alessa, and that she is a demon in disguise that's trying to make this hell on earth a reality. Being the good civil servant that she is, Sybil decides to run off to the amusement park to try and stop the demon there. Only after she leaves does Dahlia drop the slightly critical piece of information that unless you have a Floros, you have no chance of stopping the demon. So, if we think about this, she essentially allowed Sybil to run off to her death and didn't try and stop her at all. I'm beginning to think that Dahlia may not be a nice person. Harry runs off to the lighthouse as fast as he can, but he arrives too late. Alessa has already placed the mark at the lighthouse and has disappeared. This of course means that her next destination is the amusement park, and to Sybil, who has no protection for herself whatsoever. And as we see in a cutscene, Sybil does get attacked. Harry arrives at the amusement park to find Sybil passed out in a wheelchair on a carousel. She has glowing red eyes and ends up attacking Harry on sight. She's moving like a puppet, so Harry has obviously deduced that she is just in some kind of trance and ends up splashing the red liquid on her face in an attempt to wake her up. The red liquid instead ends up making this demon larva thing end up being expelled from her body, which Harry ends up stepping on. With Sybil freed from the grip of a parasitic demon baby worm, Harry ends up going deeper into the amusement park to try and stop Alessa from placing the last mark.
What is this?
When he gets there, the Fluoros activates and ends up attacking Alessa, knocking her over. At this point, Dahlia shows up, starts gloating about how she was using Harry to track down Alessa because she couldn't do it herself. Dahlia reveals that Alessa is actually her supposedly dead daughter before teleporting both her and Alessa away. The teleportation causes Harry to get knocked out once again, and apparently it carries him into the hospital once again in the same room as a strangely behaving Lisa. She's behaving strangely because apparently she decided to visit the forbidden basement that she's never been into, but for some reason she has memories of having been in there before, but she can't quite understand what they mean. Before elaborating further on this, she decides to run off and leave Harry with just more questions. Trying to get answers from her, Harry ends up chasing Lisa deeper into the hospital before she eventually reveals that she is just like the other monsters in the town. She is not a real person. With this revelation, she starts begging Harry to help her while she starts bleeding profusely from all over her body. In the fairly understandable, albeit selfish, action, Harry runs out of the room and blocks Lisa from following him while she weeps pitifully inside the room.
Lisa?
Probably feeling rather sorry for her after hearing her cry like that, Harry goes back into the room to try and find her, but ends up only finding her journal. Inside her journal, she details how she was forced to take care of a patient that she felt really uncomfortable around, and about how she starts seeing really weird visions, and about how she's apparently addicted to the drug White Claudia. And perhaps all of the strange things that she could have seen would be attributable to the White Claudia addiction, because as we find in the book a little bit later in the game, White Claudia's main property is extreme hallucinogenic effects. Now, of course, because of this fact, there's a lot of people who kind of postulated that the whole game is the effect of the White Claudia. Like, everyone's just kind of tripping on White Claudia throughout the entire game, and that's what all of the other world and monsters are supposed to be. And that the white stuff falling from the sky is White Claudia. I've heard that before too. That's all not true at all. The otherworld stuff is real. It is actually happening, and the white stuff falling from the sky is just snow. Speaking of snow, Harry ends up finding a good old TV with a VHS player on it, which is good because he found a VHS tape earlier in the game that he's never been able to view. As it turns out, that VHS tape is a recording of Lisa Garland discussing the patient that she obviously did not want to care for, that she discussed in her journal. The patient was apparently a young child who was an extreme burn victim who should have been dead, but for some reason just continued to live. We soon learn this child is Alessa Gillespie herself, as we see a flashback of Dahlia, Dr. Kaufman, and two other men talking about Alessa laying on her bed inside of her room. These four discuss how they planted something in Alessa's womb that would give them all great power, but apparently it's not working right because half of her soul is missing, and without her full soul, the powers that they're trying to obtain cannot be reached. However, they do have a plan to get the soul back together by casting a spell on Alessa. And soon after, we find out what the other half of that soul was. In the deep basement of the hospital, Dahlia has both Alessa wrapped up in bandages, which is obviously the daughter of hers that got burned horribly, and the woman that we've been seeing around town planting the Mark of Samael. This woman is actually Cheryl, taking the shape of her true form, which is that of Alessa. So what happened was, whenever they did the ritual to implant a demon god baby into Alessa's womb. A boiler in the building where they were doing the ritual ended up exploding, catching the entire building on fire and horribly burning Alessa. In order to both escape this pain and to try to prevent the demon god inside her from ever maturing, Alessa split her soul in two, and that split half of her soul ended up being the baby that Harry and his wife found on the road outside of Silent Hill. Dahlia ends up forcing the two halves of Alessa's soul back together, forming the true form of Alessa and the god of the cult. Dahlia brags about how she's birthed the god and how her and the cult will have great power now before Dr. Kaufman shows up. Apparently the vial of red liquid that he stole from Harry is something called Glophitis, which is apparently really bad for cult gods because when he throws it onto Alessa's body, it ends up making her transform into this horrible demon form called the Incubus. This god shows how merciful and wonderful he is by immediately burning Dahlia Gillespie alive. Harry fights and kills the god, which transforms back into the completed form of Alessa once again. As the building starts to burn down around them, Alessa forms another child, which she hands off to Harry before pointing him and Sybil off to the exit to leave the basement. Dr. Kaufman tries to follow them, but Lisa comes up from the pit and grabs him from behind. She apparently decided to dole out justice to Kaufman for both getting her addicted to White Claudia and presumably for killing her in the first place before she got rebirthed as a monster of Silent Hill. And with that, Sybil and Harry have escaped from Silent Hill, and we have reached the end of the game. Which of course leads us up to the plot of the two games that follow this game. Silent Hill 2 obviously taking place just a little bit after Silent Hill 1. The exact time frame is not known. However, Silent Hill 2 takes place in a Silent Hill where the place is still abandoned and everything, but the deep well of power that existed within the town of Silent Hill has now been fully corrupted by the presence of the cult god. And because of that, it's become warped into this punishment power that draws in Harry and Eddie and Angela. And that, of course, leads into the plot of Silent Hill 3, which we have been following thus far. And with that, we're done. My script here can be thrown away. Thank God. It took forever to do this. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you appreciate it. And this will be the first of at least several. We at least have a few more parts, unless I'm remembering Silent Hill 3 incorrectly. We have at least a few more parts before I have to do the next part of this. The next part will, of course, come after Father Vincent says his famous line, which has enthralled and confused and spawned so many fan theories about the nature of the other world and the games in general, and I hate him for it, but maybe they'll make for entertaining videos. I certainly hope so. I thank you all for joining me in this one, and let's get back to Silent Hill 3. What do you say? I'll see you all next time. God, Father Vincent.
Oh, they look like monsters to you?
Asshole.